नमश्रीयतिराजाय विवेकानन्दसूरये सच्चित्सुखस्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. Welcome you all to today's satsang. We are experiencing the first showers of the season. Beautiful. The pandemic is also subsiding, thankfully. The tension has come down a bit. We are able to move a bit more freely after almost a year of intermittent lockdowns. Our topic of discussion for today is complex problems, simple solution. Problems are many, but there is only one solution, and it is also very simple. Our Rishis have said this: Maya is colorful, Maya is variegated. Okay. There is multiplicity in Maya, but truth is very simple. Truth is very simple. Maya is complex. The world is complex, but that which is beyond the world, the truth, namely the Lord, is very simple, it is homogeneous. The problem is with the heterogeneity. The problem is with the duality and differentiation. The problem is with our inability to superimpose the homogeneity upon the heterogeneity. Diversity cannot exist on its own. It needs a substratum. And it is diverse in relation to something which is permanent and which is homogeneous. Right? Something has come out of something else. That which is the effect is variegated, is manifold, is diverse. But that which is the substratum, which is the support, which is the source of this multifarious universe is homogeneous, is one. Once you get access to that, once you find that, it's easy for you to navigate through this world of multiplicity. But otherwise, you get, buffeted and tossed up by every little thing that happens in our lives. So that homogeneous entity is God or soul or consciousness or truth. There are different names for that ultimate reality, but it is one, it is not two. Two is ignorance, one is actually knowledge. So if you just see the progress of human civilization from caveman to the 21st century man, caveman had his problems. It was a hunter-gatherer life. He would hunt for food, and it would be difficult for him to protect him from natural elements like rain, from sun. He had to live in caves. No protection would be possible in caves. You can't have a door, you can't have a window, right? Physical suffering. And morning to evening he had to hunt for an animal. Sometimes he would get, sometimes he will not get. It's not guarantee that actually by evening you will get your food, right? Physical suffering. And he had to use his feet, he had to run behind the animal. He had to throw his spear or to shoot an arrow, and it will miss the target. Not easy life, right? From then onwards, we kept on evolving and evolving. Then started the sedentary life. Then started agriculture. We started organizing ourselves. We could produce food with great ease. Not that everybody would have to produce food. A few people would produce food, and the rest of the people had a lot of leisure. Then we started inventing things. We started organizing our life. We went for culture, literature, arts, poetry, and other amenities of life, comforts and luxuries we could develop because of the leisure that we had. If everybody had to run behind animals like caveman, everybody had to work only on fields to produce food, then all this development would not have been possible. The suffering of the caveman was undoubtedly the physical. He had little psychological suffering. There was nobody around to abuse him, nobody around to ill-treat him, nobody to expect anything from him. So there was not much psychological suffering. Even if somebody had abused him, okay, in the own tribal dialect, because he had only that kind of language, he would not mind because he was not that sensitive. The caveman was not sensitive at all. My ego got hurt. That kind of language caveman would not use because he didn't even know what is ego. He was not conscious of that. So as we kept on evolving and evolving, education has come, culture, civilizations have progressed. So many amenities, comforts, all this we could invent. Perhaps never before in human history, life actually as better organized as it is today. In terms of the physical comfort, what we enjoy is even actually, even gods may envy this. What comfort that we have brought into a society, a system, a civilization, even gods might envy. And Vivekananda, when he was in the West, it was 120 years back, Swamiji said, seeing the American civilization of those days, he said they are making 5 elements dance to their tune. And he meant to say that they have manipulated the external world to such an extent, they have created so many machines. Life is so well organized and so comfortable. And even today I consider, America is heaven on earth in terms of roads and the amenities that are available to people. But the suffering actually has shifted from physical to psychological if you carefully analyze human societies. As this, so much of science and technology has developed, so many things we have invented, but has it helped us to solve the problem of suffering? Are we less suffering than a caveman? Can we say that? The suffering is in a way less than it was in the past. Somehow the suffering is more or less the same. Actually, it just shifted the plane from physical to the psychological, that's all. The kind of competition that exists today, the struggles, right? The insecurity feeling, all this is there. Psychological suffering. All this was not there with caveman. So things have changed externally, but the suffering has not diminished to the extent that we hoped for, to the extent that we have anticipated. We thought that invention of these things, creation of these amenities and comforts and accessories would reduce the misery in the world. We thought, but it has not happened to the extent that we have expected or anticipated. Yeah, to some extent it might have, helped us to make life more comfortable, less painful, but it has not solved the problem of suffering as such. Why? So, if you just see, Swamiji says clearly that manipulation of matter or creation of machines actually will not reduce the suffering. The root cause of suffering, also on the root cause of happiness. The source of suffering and the source of happiness is mind. So we have not paid enough attention to the subjective side of personality. Our rishis way back from 6,000, 7,000 years back had understood this. They carefully saw the world, analyzed the world and the nature of experiences, human experiences, and then came to the conclusion that as long as you have this mind, you will have both pain and pleasure. There is no way you can escape. Whole life I will have only pleasure. Whole life I will have only happiness. I will have only joyful moments. They said it's not possible. Because the way the mind is designed, the way mind is created, you cannot have just only a peaceful life, a happy life, a comfortable life. There were moments actually, there were times and periods we would enjoy, and there would be periods where actually we would suffer. Some suffering is inevitable for every being, whoever has come with this kind of embodiment. And so then what is the solution? They pondered deep on the nature of existence. They pondered deep on the subjective side of human being. What is man? What we mean when we say that I suffer, suffering is to me. What does this I stand for? So they went deep. So what is the source of this I? And what they have found is this is only a fictitious entity. It doesn't really exist there. The mind is based on this ego sense. When this ego sense is obliterated, then there is that homogeneous entity behind this little ego sense, behind this tiny aham. There is that infinite aham, the cosmic existence, that divine personality of our own being. It is so close. Such a profound dimension is so close, but it is not accessible to us. What is blocking us from gaining access to that ultimate reality? This little ego sense. So they have come to the conclusion that there is suffering in the world, that suffering, the root cause of suffering is ignorance. So if you have to overcome suffering, then you have to go for knowledge. And Sri Ramakrishna used to say then, what is ignorance? I and mine is ignorance. Very simple definition for ignorance. What is ignorance? I and mine is ignorance. You just see the world. We have not done the world. Yeah, we are part of the world. We have not created it. Everything that is there in the creation belongs to the Creator. It's simple logic. Whatever that is there in the creation should belong to the Creator, right? We have not done the creation. We are part of the creation. So as part of the creation, we also belong to that Creator. We don't know as yet who is that Creator, right? We use the word God. We can use the word Bhagavan or consciousness. So everything in this universe belongs to Him, including our personality, our being, this body and mind, which we identify with and think we are that. It doesn't belong to us. In fact, it belongs to Him. It belongs to the Creator because it's part of the creation. The last class we discussed the body is made up of 5 elements. The mind is made up of 3 gunas. God is the owner of 5 elements. So mind is made up of 3 gunas, sattva, rajas and tamas. That's how it's made up of. It's the constituent blocks of the mind. So those constituent blocks exist in God. And these 5 elements also God has created and they exist in Him. So the body which is made up of 5 elements must belong to Him. And the mind which is made up of 3 gunas also should belong to Him. When He is the owner, and then who are we? What do you mean by I when we say I? It's too fictitious. It's totally unreal. But you know how much of power it wields on us. How much of suffering because of this little I, which is not there. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, you just peel off the onion. You'll get a first thin layer. And then actually second layer, third layer, fourth layer, fifth layer. You just go on peeling. Nothing remains in the end. Empty. Similarly, this ego sense. You just go and trace it to its root. It's not there, it disappears. This ego sense is like, he gives another example, like plantain stem. Plantain stem, is a kind of, I think, a modification of leaf. It's not a trunk in the true sense of the term, plantain stem. You just peel it off. You can just peel it, layer after layer. Thick layers will come. After nothing. There is no central essence. There is no central stem, as it were. It's just a few layers, that's all. Like a bony wood, it's not just like, the strong wood is there in the center, the pith. But for this plantain stem, there is no pith. Similarly, this ego sense has no core existence, no existence of its own. It is just a fictitious thing. It is just a projection. It doesn't really exist there. And so, you just have to turn inward and look into the nature of your own being. Who am I? What this I stands for. If you can trace it to its root, trace it to its origin, it disappears. And then actually it's bliss, it is ananda, then it is nirvana. So this much we have to do. So what happened to us then? That which belongs to God, we appropriate to ourselves. Okay? For example, you have misappropriated somebody else's property. You are taking somebody else's property. You are appropriating to yourself something which doesn't belong to you. What happens? That individual to whom the property belongs, he will file a complaint. Then you will have to go to court. And they will put you in jail, right? You will be behind bars if you take away somebody else's property. Similarly, this body and mind, the whole universe belongs to God. And if you take away God's property, you should do the same thing, right? He should imprison you. Yes, God does the same thing. He has imprisoned us in this cycle of samsara. For what? Because we have appropriated His property. Because we have appropriated His property, nothing belongs to us in fact. But everybody keeps saying that this is mine, this building is mine, that is mine. No, from where you have got the building? Building blocks, the material for the building, from the universe, to whom the universe belongs. Then the building also should belong to Him. What you are doing is little permutation and combination. From here to there to here you are bringing. So everything belongs to that one Creator, including this body and mind. If you can hold everything that you possess in that sense that it doesn't really belong to me, at least I am a custodian, I am a trustee, but it originally belongs to God. And the body and mind are also, He is the owner, I am only a custodian. Actually a better idea, Sri Ramakrishna says. If you consider yourself as an instrument in the hands of the divine, okay, This belongs to him actually. It's his play instrument. The body and mind are his play instruments, and he will play with his instrument according to his will. After all, he has created this play instrument. Somehow we have forgotten the Lord. We have forgotten the truth. It's a wave, let us say, the wave example, the Advaitins gives this classic example of a wave and the ocean. Wave has forgotten that is part of the ocean. Today our condition is just like that. We have forgotten our divine moving. We have forgotten our divine essence. We have forgotten our divine root. How do we exist? We exist because of soul, because of consciousness, because of God. We don't have that awareness at all. We identify with body and mind and we think this is the reality, this is our personality, this is our being. No. Body and mind cannot function on their own. They are insentient, they are jada. Something else is there. Life principle is something different from these two. That is consciousness, which animates these two, which makes the two function. So body belongs to those two, that entity, that soul, or that consciousness. So in between this fictitious I has come, because of that all suffering. How problematic and how painful it would be for the wave actually, when it thinks that actually it doesn't belong to the ocean, or it forgets the ocean completely. Every little wind can toss it up and push it down. It gets buffeted and battered by the wind. Little wind is sufficient. So the wave will have to undergo tremendous suffering. At least the wave should have the consciousness, if not, I am the ocean, I belong to the ocean, right? The real truth is actually wave is part of the ocean. It's never separate from the ocean. It can never be separated from the ocean. Is it possible to separate the ocean, wave from the ocean? Can the wave exist separately from the ocean? Is it ever possible? Can you ever think of that? Impossible, right? Wave is eternally part of the ocean. Even if the wave thinks that it is dying, it is just subsists into the ocean. It doesn't die. It can't die. Yes, we are like that also. But now if a wave thinks, if it forgets the ocean completely, then suffering begins automatically. Wave at least should have the understanding that I belong to the ocean. In fact, it is not separate from not even the I belong to the ocean. Wave is the ocean. And every human being, for that matter, every creature on the planet Earth is just the divine. Aham Brahmasmi, the Advaitins' favorite Mahavakya. Tattvamasi, you are the divine entity. But we don't have that awareness because we have identified with the unreal. So let go this identification, you are with the divine. It's as simple as that. It puts an end to all the problems, all the suffering, including the suffering that comes to us with death. The ultimate suffering for a human being is death. That suffering also you will be able to overcome. And what lies beyond is immortality. And to gain that immortality is our birthright. To gain that immortality is our birthright. We have to endeavor, we have to put our best of the effort to achieve that. So why actually we are not able to surrender this I? Why we are not able to let go this fictitious thing? When it's so unreal, why it becomes such a great problem for us to put it down? As Ramana Maharshi says that ego surrenders only when it sees the higher. Now our fear is that if I let go my identification with the body, who am I? It's like annihilation of my being, my personality. I totally die. People think that. That's why they hold on to this little ego sense like grim death. But it's not real. So it doesn't die, it doesn't dissolve because of this. Because it creates a fear in your being that you're killing yourself. You're annihilating yourself. But you have to cajole, that's chitta balakam. You have to lalayet. You have to cajole it. In the Yoga Vasishta says that this dissolution is not annihilation. Then only it gets convinced. Only when it's convinced totally, it will die. It will dissolve. No death even for that. Wave actually subsists into the ocean, that's all. This limited and little individuality will merge into that universal individuality. That is nirvana. So because unless and until it sees the higher, it doesn't go. That is the only thing. So in the beginning actually, you have to intellectually, you have to convince yourself. In the beginning, you have to understand, you have to convince the mind, convince the ego sense that there is the higher. But today that higher, our real personality, our real being is hidden, it's latent. Swamiji says every soul is potentially divine. The divine exists in us in a potential form and you have to bring it into kinetic form. At least even little awakening happens, then you will get convinced that there is something other than this little ego sense, which is very profound. And then it becomes easy for us to drop this little I. To drop this only, we have all these yogas, Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. So this is the problem. We have appropriated that which doesn't really belong to us. That which belongs to God, we appropriate to ourselves. We identify with that, and then we can't get away from that, then the suffering comes. So, you just see, not only this ego sense, once it is there, how many tricks it plays us, how much we have to suffer. You just see what kind of acts the human beings will do when they are under its influence. You might have heard, recently I was reading a newspaper and I just came across a small news item. A French president offers his short apology, or asked the Rwandans to forgive. So I just became curious. What the French president asking the Rwandans, Rwanda is a country in Africa, asking them to forgive, what happened? I just went back and read the whole report. Way back in 1994, there was genocide in Rwanda. What kind of genocide had happened there? The country actually consists of two tribes, Hutus and Tutsi. 85% of the population was Hutu and 15% was Tutsi. And Hutus were ruling. The Hutu president was killed in a plane accident. Somebody shot down the plane. And the Hutus, they suspected that it was the act of Tutsis. Tutsis were, they were kind of, before that they ruled. And, there was some civil problems in the country that the Hutus are actually jealous of Tutsis, because Tutsis ruled Hutus for a long period of time. And that time actually Hutus only were ruling, but the Hutu president was killed in a plane accident and they suspected that it was the act of Tutsis. And then they went about, a propaganda of hatred towards Tutsis and asked every Hutu man to kill Tutsis. A genocide followed. In 100 days, they killed 10 lakh people. It did not happen sometime, back in the medieval period or in ancient India. This battle happened in 1994, where in 100 days, 10 lakh people were killed. Hutu, people of one tribe, killed the people of another tribe. Per day, 10,000 people. They didn't even kill them with guns. In 1994, I'm saying. They killed them with clubs and machetes, sword. Man killed man, not one or two, in 100 days, 10 lakh people. So it did not happen in medieval period, that's why I'm saying how actually human consciousness works. Such a deep identification, I belong to this tribe. This is my identity. I derive my identity through this. And so you are completely separate from me. You are a separate entity. Your identity is different. The people who are living together, who had been actually living together in friendly terms with each other, suddenly developed such deep hatred towards each other. Of course, there was some propaganda was done, but that was not the reason why man reacted so, because of identification with the tribe. I belong to this, and they are a source of annoyance for us, because they are, of course, this Tutsi tribe actually, socially they were more progressive. They had occupied, higher positions in society, because they were more given to, intellectual pursuits like literature, art, and they were into administration, a great number. And Hutus are primarily into agriculture. So a kind of division of labor, nothing more than that. So because the 15% actually was socially, better placed, and that created a kind of, probably jealousy, and they had that feeling inside, and they gave vent to all those feelings. And it happened. Government also supported, because it was Hutu government at the point of time. French forces were there on the ground. They did not intervene, though that a genocide was going on, and they did not report it to France back. Somebody could have intervened, some international powers could have come forward, United Nations. But before they opened their eyes, massacre had happened, genocide had happened, 10 lakh people died. This is not a small number, I'm saying it happened in recent history. Because of this identification. Now the civil war going on, Syria, the last 6 years or 7 years, 5 lakh people were killed. 50,000 children, believe 50,000 children. So these things are not happening actually, or not happened in the distant past. when current times is happening. If you just analyze the problem, you will find that it boils down to this sectarian strife. I belong to one sect, you belong to another sect. Same people of same faith, same book, just a little interpretation is different. So I interpret it this way and you interpret that way. That's all. Sectarian strife is happening even today. And I identify with my belief so strongly, my interpretation, my understanding of the scripture, that your understanding is totally wrong, and then you become an enemy for me. So if I get an opportunity, I will kill you. So the savage instinct is very much there. We think actually we have become civilized. Here civilization has not happened actually, we have to progress. So these identities, that's what actually they actually take us away from God. They actually bring us the worst from us. So we have to let go these identities. In the last class also we discussed, whatever may be that identity, just for conducting our affairs in this mundane world, we can take up these identities, but we must understand that these identities are not real. Our identity with the divine, that divine actually is the same in every creature, not just in every human being. It is there, that life principle, that consciousness. So in a way, we are related to other beings also, other creatures also. They are also part and parcel of our own being. Not just your fellow human beings are part and parcel of your being. Other creatures are also part and parcel of your being. That kind of universal identification must come. That expansion actually, in fact, is spirituality. So if I identify with the caste, if I identify with the region or the language or the nationality or religion, and you are most likely to see the difference. You love your own people who identify just the way you have identified, and people who have other identities, they will become their enemies. In course of time, when the situation erupts, actually we don't know how we behave. These are all the things happening now. So we must understand that these identities are not important, they are all very fictitious, they are unreal, and they block our spiritual progress. And if you are not careful actually, if you are not alert and if you are not aware, what happens? We don't know. The asura in us actually will come out, will find a greater expression than the divine. And whereas our philosophy says that constantly assert your divine nature, don't identify with these things actually, uncondition the mind, and then you will become all loving. You will become like Buddha, you will become like Christ, you will be able to embrace the whole mankind as part of your being. That kind of love you will be able to emanate, you will be able to manifest. Once you let go all these identities, let go this little ego sense. That is the danger of the intellect. Unfortunately, in our today's education system, we focus so much on the intellect. Intellect actually distinguishes. Intellect actually is a tool, a good tool, it's an instrument. What it does is, it says that this is good and this is bad. That is actually necessary to conduct our life in a mundane world. If I don't know, what is good, who is a good man in the sense that not in the absolute sense. With somebody, I can't keep evil company, okay? That's right. You have to have discretion. Otherwise, Advaita also sometimes becomes dangerous in the sense that, as Swamiji says again and again, you must not condemn the individual, but because he has had bad habits, you can't keep his company. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that, tiger, there is a God in tiger also. But because there is a God in tiger, you don't go and embrace it, right? It has its nature also. So a human being also, there are tiger like human beings in the sense that they have, certain qualities. If you keep the company of them, it might be possible that you actually contract their qualities, their habits. Today this is happening, right? Increasingly. So we need to have some distinction actually. So if I keep the company of this individual, will I progress spiritually or will it lead to my downfall? And you have to have that discrimination. That's all. But you should not condemn the individual, he is also divine. Swamiji says, a thief also divine is only manifesting, but he has taken up the wrong means and wrong ways. He is also progressing towards the divine, progressing towards the ultimate freedom, but unconsciously. He will get blows and then he will turn towards. He will also become a conscious seeker tomorrow. Today he is an unconscious seeker after the truth, and tomorrow he will become a conscious seeker. That's why if you are an Advaitin, if you are a true spiritualist and a spiritual personality, you should not distinguish any man. You should not make these distinctions between individual and individual. You should not take them too seriously. That's what I'm saying. They are there, but they have only conventional value, but they are not absolute. When you have this understanding, then you will be able to love all, embrace all, and you will be able to look upon everybody with great compassion and love. Nobody is an object of condemnation for you. Everybody is an object of worship. Everybody will become an object of love for you. And that is the understanding that we need to develop, and spirituality will help you to develop that kind of love and that kind of empathy towards all the beings. So if we identify with any of these, so there is a danger of our going away from the Lord. And so the ultimate teaching of Vedanta is oneness. So this is the yardstick, this is the measure with which we have to judge our spiritual progress. How much actually my spiritual consciousness has expanded? How much actually universal consciousness is manifesting in me? Do I identify with every life form that exists? Am I able to love other beings as much as I love myself? So these are the yardstick that we need to use when you want to measure your spiritual progress. So these are all illusory identities, they don't have a real value about them. And if you identify with them too strongly, then there is every possibility, though you have the good intention of manifesting your divinity and divine nature, sometimes the reverse will happen. The reverse will happen. More of the asuric nature actually will be manifest through you. And that's why don't take these individualities too seriously. You just see children, they don't identify with anything. So 6-year-old kids or 7-year-old kids, both boys and girls, you put together, right? Maybe Christian, Hindu, Muslim of different faiths, and throw a ball in their midst. They will just play with the ball very naturally. And they are not even conscious of their sex till 12, 13. So they play with. So what happens to that child nature? When we grow up, identities will become stronger and stronger. The child doesn't identify with anything strongly. That's why he's joyful, full of joy. That's why we say that children are manifestations of the divine. We feel like actually going towards them, okay? We feel like loving them. Why? Because they become such objects of love for us because of that unconditioned mind, not identified with anything. As we grow older, the conditioning also becomes stronger and stronger. We are not mindful of this, that is the problem. So the purpose of education should be to keep this Maya at bay from you, where you don't actually, the childlike nature, you will continue with that. You are as guileless as a child, as simple as a child, as free as a child. And if you can keep on that, but in most of the cases what happens, we become very conditioned, we identify with everything, and then again we have to get back our childlike nature. That's what sage is. I don't know whether you have observed any sage or a spiritually perfect soul, and he would behave just like a child, as simple as a child, as guileless as a child, and he would be all loving. Our Swamis say, many of them they have seen, of senior Swamis of the order, monks who had attained great spiritual progress. In Belur Math we have Argabhavan, the reminiscences we keep studying. So what is the sign that he has become a Brahmagyani? So he would be totally unconditioned, simple and guileless individual. Through conduct and through behavior, they could detect that actually Maharaj has attained to a high degree of spiritual progress, and he has attained illumination. Unconditioning of the mind is the thing. He would behave like a child, but at the same time he is very alert and very conscious and highly intelligent. All these things are there, but yet outward behavior. And everybody would get attracted towards them because of their love and because of their unconditional mind. Because of their unconditional mind. They don't declare that I am a Brahmagyani, you ought to worship me, you ought to respect me. No such request will come from them. They don't tell that, they will never tell that. A true Brahmagyani never tell that. It is for you to detect him. It is for you to detect him, to come in his company. So you will also become unconditioned. You will also attain to that state. It is called true satsanga, in fact. So we have to bring back that simple nature, but our education, to the society, the people around keep actually conditioning our mind further and further. And then we enter into a kind of grooves, and then we have to struggle again to come out of that groove. That is all spirituality is. So we have to be aware of that. We have to be conscious of that. The children must be told, children must be taught, and don't identify with anything like these things. Our life is one. That was the first instruction that our gurus would give in ancient Gurukulas. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. The whole universe is pervaded by one divine spirit. Everything that you see in the world is vibhuti, is manifestation of that one divine. The child is first given the thought of Advaita. So don't make any distinction between one thing and another thing. Don't take this distinction seriously. It is one divine manifesting, expressing through all the life forms. So don't condemn something actually as low, something as high, something as very bad, something as inferior. And you have to develop that universal outlook, oh my child. That will be the first instruction. And that is only an intellectual idea now. As the child grows older and older, he is likely to form the conditioning. He is likely to saw the distinctions as real. And then the sage would keep instructing him, no, these distinctions are not real. It's all one divine, one divine. So intellectually you will understand in the beginning, and then you will do the sadhana, and afterwards actually it's an experiential reality for you. You have experienced the truth for yourself, not just actually everything is divine. I see it tangibly, I feel it, I experience it, everything is part of me. So everything is part of the divine consciousness. I am also in that divine consciousness. He is the source of the whole universe. That Advaitic experience is the summum bonum of life. That is that infinite beatitude. That is the real experience of life. We are in fact actually traveling towards that, albeit unconsciously. And spirituality or spiritual longing and striving is all about consciously. Why can't you try? We can. So all these divine personalities and divine sages and the rishis come in our midst to remind us of our divine nature. Oh man, you are essentially divine. You have forgotten the divine nature. That's the reason there is so much of suffering. You are wrongly identified with the body and mind. You have the body, you have the mind, but you are not the body, you are not the mind. There is a higher dimension to your personality, to your being, and bring that dimension into experience. Further, these are the spiritual sadhanas that you need to bring into your life. And all these sadhanas are given to us. So, no, I learn from my own experience. Okay, all this is just to shorten the time. Everybody will realize in course of time. Kalena Atmani Vindati, Gita says. Everybody will realize, everybody will come to the truth. There is no denying of that, because we are made in truth, we exist in truth, and we have to return back to the truth. We go back to the truth ultimately. So we will have some experiences in the world. Okay, we think that there is happiness, we explore for happiness in this world, and there will come a time you understand for yourself that there is no true happiness. It's all a vanity. It is void without real substance. Okay, it's real, not without real. It's without any substance. When you understand that it's empty, in terms of happiness, it doesn't give you the lasting happiness, everlasting happiness, then you will come to the conclusion, automatically you will travel towards the truth. It will happen. But why all this, preaching and teaching and asking you people to read books, to do sadhana? That's only to shorten the time. The truth that which you might get in 100 years, and 100 births, if you get in 10 births or 5 births, or in this birth itself, how beautiful it would be. All the suffering that you will have to undergo in 100 births, okay, you avoid it, right? Be wise. Be wise. Learn your lessons as quickly as possible in the school of life. That's what our sages say. How much time it will take for you to learn these lessons of life? So if you're a wise man, if you're an intelligent man, if you're smart, you learn your lessons quickly. If you're dumb or you're dullard, it takes more time, that's all. But you learn from the school of life. And there are people who say that I will learn only from my experience. But there is a saying, as the saying goes, experience keeps a dear school. And fools learn from no other. The school is very costly. If you want to learn from the school of experience, I will learn only from my personal experience. Only I feel convinced, then I will come to the path of spirituality. You will come for sure to the path of spirituality. It may take eons. It may take hundreds of births. So because that is the nature of Maya. Maya always wants to entangle you. We come into the world with certain tendencies, right? We have certain inclinations or proclivities. We have our own temperament. That temperament goads us in one particular direction. So it propels us to act in a particular manner. So sometimes these acts that we perform, under the impulse or under the force of these tendencies, may be hurtful to others. Maybe we are hurting others in the process. So then they say that it's a bad karma. This way, in all our scriptures, first importance is given to ahimsa, then satya. That's why I say even satya, truth. Don't tell a bitter truth, but truth is always bitter. Don't say if it's painful. If it turns painful to the other individual, don't say it. The first importance you must give to ahimsa, non-violence. That is the highest virtue, the highest value. The Yudhishthira says in Mahabharata, so he says, Anushamsyam parodharmaha paramarthachame matam. In that Yaksha Prasnas it comes, in conversation with Yaksha. I consider this compassion, Anushamsyam, as the highest virtue, highest value. And I long for that, I seek that, he says. So, you have to become as non-violent as possible. But of course, then we interact with people, definitely, always, we may not be hurting others, we may not be attacking others with sticks or stones or, the instruments, armaments. The physical violence, of course, we may not be doing, but verbal also, you can do a lot of violence through words also. And as I said, a caveman, you would use any kind of language, you would not get hurt. The modern man is very sensitive. He's sensitive to gestures, not even to words. One gesture is sufficient to hurt the individual, not for a day or two, for life. You have become so sensitive, you need to understand. And then how carefully you have to conduct yourself, you understand. The other day, one of our teachers, he was taking a class, I had a complaint from a student. So he was asking the students to respond, but they were not responding, maybe one student. Then immediately he said that, are you dumb? He thought he was perfectly right in using that kind of expression in the language. Then somebody else, that individual actually, to whom he had asked this question, he did not send the email. Somebody else from the class sent the email. The teacher uses such language. If the student doesn't respond, can he use such language? And the teacher, unfortunately, he doesn't understand that what wrong I did actually. I just asked, why are you not speaking? You speak out, you can tell. If you have any problem, you can ask. But when you say that, are you dumb? Definitely it hurts the individual, right? Definitely it hurts. And then I got a complaint. Then I have to call the teacher and I have to tell him and sensitize him. You need to be very careful with regard to words and expressions that you use. Oh, Swamiji, I teach with all the passion and I prepare so well. But when I ask the question, they don't respond, they don't involve in the class. But you can't use such language. You have to casual them. What is the problem? Why you couldn't study? You have any other responsibilities because of that? So we have become so sensitive. So when it comes to practicing non-violence, what language I use, what words I use, whether it's likely to what impact it creates on the other individual. Apart from the language that you use, the individual may be hypersensitive, we don't know. People have their own sensitivities and sensibilities. Not everybody would react in the same way. Even today, actually, an illiterate man you can use, you can abuse. You can use such harsh language, but he doesn't take it seriously. Educated people are definitely more sensitive. And even among the educated, there is a huge variation from the individual to individual in terms of their sensitivities. Some of them, they take these words very seriously and they get wounded rather. They don't get hurt, they get wounded. And so you have to be very careful with regard to the language that you use. In Mahabharata, that Yayati gives the same instruction to his son Puru. Nahi drusham samvananam vidyate. So this kind of worship is not obtained anywhere in the world. He says actually, Madurachavak, your speech should be sweet. Son asks father, Father, give me an instruction, you are going to heaven, you are going to leave this world. One instruction that I will follow for whole life. Only one instruction father gives Yayati. My child, never ever forget. Be soft in your speech. That's all. Madurachavak. Hold on to this. Things will happen in course of time. So see, sometimes we get provoked and we use the language, afterwards we repent. And at least we should have the humility to offer an apology. I have to seek the forgiveness. I hurt you. I was harsh with you. I'm sorry for that. So at least actually some of your bad karma will get obliterated. So we unconsciously we keep accumulating this bad karma, I'm saying, because today we are in competition with each other, unfortunately. We have created societies in such a way. The spiritual goal is not actually, it's a sole goal for people, and many of them have not even figured out the basics of life. Okay, what understanding we have on life, what knowledge and wisdom our rishis have passed on to us, we don't value it much today. Our idea of life is, we are the most progressive society ever. And the people who lived in the past were dumb. Whole universe. It was true about other races and other civilizations, but not about India. Definitely, we are nowhere compared to our forefathers, nowhere compared to our rishis, compared to the strength that they had, compared to the purity that they had, compared to the knowledge that they had. You are a non-entity, I'm saying. Their wisdom is true, profound, but we ignore. That's to our peril. Highest wisdom. Swamiji says actually, they were not recluses. Again and again he says in his complete work, they were not recluses. Some of these ideas, the grandest spiritual ideas, were given to us by kings. Bhagavad Gita, where it was preached on the battlefield. You just imagine, a few hours from now actually, the warrior has to enter into the battle. He had to command a whole army. And now actually he listens to a spiritual talk, philosophical talk, and internalizes the idea and proceeds to fight the war. So kings who were actually commanding vast armies, who had to deal with millions of people, who had to look into the affairs of the millions of people, were the people who had given us this highest wisdom. They led such busy lives, but at the same time, they were very contemplative at the same time. They were not restless like us, the present generation. They had the tranquility of mind. They would take time off from the hustle and bustle, from the busy lives, to contemplate, to understand the nature of my own being. If I don't understand myself, if I don't have a comprehensive understanding about my own nature, then how can I deal with others comfortably? It is to my disadvantage and also to the disadvantage of the other person. So it's very important. That's why last week also I told, Swadhyaya is a great word in our culture. Swadhyaya. Adhyaya is study, Swa is studying one's own self. It's not reading a book. Swadhyaya means not reading the scriptures. Do you study yourself? Do you try to understand yourself? What understanding you have about yourself? This is not a simple piece of life. You need to study, you need to ponder, you need to go deep. Once I understand the mystery of this being, it's as good as I have understood the mystery of all the beings. So, do you pay that much of attention? Do you take time off? Sri Ramakrishna says actually, you go into some corner and meditate. Spend some time with yourself. In the beginning, you will find your thoughts very troublesome, but afterward they all will subsist. You will understand yourself in a better light. That helps you actually to interact with other individuals in a better way. Quality of human relationship will improve for sure. Actually, everybody is just gloating on the surface. I don't understand myself, I don't care to understand you. And there is friction, there is peacelessness in the families. Everybody thinks that he is right or I am right. My way is highway. My doxy is orthodoxy, Swamiji says. Why the fights are happening in the name of religion? In Hinduism, actually, in Sanatana Dharma, we give the freedom. That's why there are no quarrels, there are no fightings between the individuals who are practicing the same dharma, the same spiritual traditions. But you just see other religions, how much of fighting and quarreling is happening between the individuals of the same faith. There are liberals, there are moderates, there are conservatives, there are orthodox people, there are ultra-orthodox, there are fanatical people, and there are extremist elements following the same faith. That's what the fight is all about. How I interpret the scripture. I am a liberal. You don't like my liberal interpretation of the scripture. You are orthodox. You are ultra-orthodox. You say, no. This is the way. My doxy is the orthodoxy. Your doxy is heterodoxy. Your interpretation is not right. So you ought to subscribe to my understanding and my way of interpretation of the scripture. Otherwise, you have to die in my hands. This is basic crass ego. And keep telling that God willing, but God doesn't will actually. You will, and you try to enforce your will upon the Lord. I will, and God must do my bidding and my will. So that is the unripeness. I can use the word. The ego is so unripe. And what is the proof of a person actually who has surrendered completely to the divine? He will bow to everything that he finds in the creation. Every little creature. He will bow even before an ant. But the ant actually doesn't see as an ant. He sees as an expression of the divine. This is worthy of my worship. It's an object of my worship. It can be because it's all God for me. It's not just a small, tiny creature. I don't look upon an ant like that. And that kind of humility and self-effacement will come. And that's the proof that actually God will manifest through you. And not before. The surrender is not that easy. As I said, Ramana Maharshi says that the ego will surrender only when it sees the higher. Unless you apprehend the higher, you won't be able to surrender completely to the divine. You think that I have surrendered to the divine because I say God willing. But it's not actually. It's your will. You are executing, not God's will. It takes time for God to manifest through you fully. You have to surrender completely. That absolute surrender is not an easy thing. You have to be a spiritual sadhaka. You have to strive and strive and strive. When you have that divine vision, and then thereafter actually, you are a complete and perfect instrument in the hands of the divine. Whatever that manifests through you is only the divine. Until you attain to that experience, it could be the devil that is manifesting through you. Okay. Sometimes divine, sometimes devil. The deeper the identification and greater the Satan or this Maya will manifest through you. And then naturally you will become a source of trouble for others. And also to yourself also, you will accumulate bad karma. And then that will bring in fear birth. So the Vedanta keeps saying again and again, exert your divine nature and try to bring that into your experience. The sooner the better for you. Plunge into sadhana and get to that experience and make yourself a blessed individual. So that is our birthright. It's possible for everybody. Latu Maharaj, one of the monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, was asked about this I. Then he said there are three kinds of attitude that we can have with God. My God, I am God, I am God's, I am God's, my God. So my God actually is kind of faith. You believe in that. My God versus your God. That is a source of a problem. But anyway, you can identify with God that way. You want to have God and it's my God. Okay. But that's not the highest thing. I am God. It's a blasphemy according to certain traditions. But in Sanatana Dharma, we have this Aham Brahmasmi. After realization of the God, you can say that I am God. You are God, in fact. But that you can say only after the realization. Before you say that I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi, the body you are saying Brahman, but body is not the Brahman. You have not had the experience yet, and so you cannot say, Sri Ramakrishna says, wave cannot say, the ocean belongs to me. The ocean can say, wave belongs to me. And the third, I am God's. This is a good attitude. Latu Maharaj says, Swami Adbhutananda, I am God's. I belong to God. That is attitude, good attitude. If you have that awareness all the time, one day you will have the realization. God will look upon you. And gives the example. Rama once asked, he wanted to know how Hanuman looks upon him. And he asked Hanuman, how do you look upon me? Hanuman says, O Lord, Deha Buddhya Dasoham Deha Buddhya tu Dasoham Jiva Buddhya tu Tvadamshakaha Atma Buddhya Tvamevahamiti iti nischita matihi. Deha buddhya, if I have body consciousness, I am your servant. Deha buddhya tu dasoham. Jiva buddhya tu tvadamshakaha. If I have the understanding that I am amsha, part manifestation of you, I am part of you, then I consider you as part of you. See, the Lord says that, Mamevamsho jiva lokye jiva bhutah sanatanaha. My amsha, my part has entered into all the beings. So I exist in all the beings, the Lord says, as amsha, as part manifestation, not complete manifestation. A little manifestation of the divine. He is divine only supporting us. He is there. But not complete manifestation. That is only the difference. As Swamiji says again and again, the difference between the individual and the individual in the degree of manifestation of that divine nature. How much of the divine nature you can manifest? For that you need culture, you need samskara, good samskara, you need sadhana. Atma buddhya, says, Atma buddhya, Tvamevaham iti me nischita matihi. When I have that awareness that I am the Atman, and after bringing that into experience, you and I are one. Aham Brahmasmi. So these are three different stages. First it is Dvaita, then it is Vishishtadvaita, then it is Advaita, one with the Lord. Three systems of philosophy, just in simple one sloka, Hanuman has condensed. What is the difference between Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita and Advaita? Sometimes we get the doubt. In one sloka. Simply, if I have body consciousness, when I say I understand only the physical body, the best attitude for you to say is, I am the servant of the Lord, I am the dasa of the Lord. That is the best attitude that you can have. But now actually you have the awareness of consciousness, you have the awareness of the Atman a little. You have not fully manifest that. Still body is there, the mind is there. But you are aware of your spiritual identity, spiritual individuality. You have that consciousness, a bit of that. Then you can say that, I am a part of the Lord. I am His amsha, I am His part manifestation. But you have completely experienced the truth. You have attained samadhi. You have attained kaivalya. Then that samadhi state you can say, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that. I am the truth. You have become one with that. So this superficial individuality is totally dissolved into cosmic individuality. And that's the blessed state of experience that we are all moving towards that experience. Yeah, it will happen sooner or later. So right kind of attitude, Radha's attitude for us actually as we are in this world. I think Mahapurush Maharaj, Swami Shivanandaji, another monastic disciple of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, once when he was in Belur Mutt, queen, I think, a queen of one province in Bengal, she had come to him. And she said, Maharaj, you have many devotees like me, but I have none other than you. So she meant that so many devotees are there, okay, so you will shower your grace upon all. But will you remember me? And Mahapurush Maharaj said, when she was in tears and when he said this, she said, yeah, she made a great statement. And Radha used to say like this to Krishna, Krishna, I have none other than you. You alone are my support. You alone are my refuge. If we can say this all the time with the Lord, the day is not far off before He reveals Himself to you. This is the best attitude that we can have, particularly in this Kali Yuga. Oh Lord, you are the sole support to me. And most of the time we depend upon our money or possessions and other people thinking that they will help. They also will help only if God wills. But instead of actually seeking help from these people who are limited just like you, they have their own limitations, how much they can help you. You are limited and you are seeking help from another limited individual. Instead of seeking help from all these limited entities, you can actually seek the help from the Lord. If He pleases with you, He will send help, any amount of help, any degree of help. He will rescue you from the samsara itself. So why can't we develop that kind of attitude? Oh Lord, actually I have you alone as my refuge. You alone are my support. You alone are my friend. You alone are my philosopher. You alone are my guide. You alone are my succor in life. It's a great attitude we all can cultivate. Let's pray to the Divine that He might allow us to surrender at His feet, and may Lord shower His choices, blessings upon all of us. We'll stop here for today. The bell is given for Arati. Just we shall meditate for 2 minutes before we disperse. Om